Haere mai, haere mai. Welcome to our fourth webinar for the Learning Over Lunch webinar series. I cannot believe that we're already 4 webinars in. Quick note to say thank you so much to those of you who've been coming along. We see you and we really appreciate the support. As you all know, in this series, we will be showcasing the diverse work, experiences and insights of violence preventionists from across the motu and in today's case, across the world, in little old London. And we will, who are people that are doing primary prevention in action. We post recordings of these webinars on our ACC YouTube channel. The fabulous Halandri, a colleague of mine, will be posting a link in the chat in case you're interested in catching up in previous webinars. But before I continue, I'd like to start with karakia tūtaua mai I runga. Feel free to join in with me. Me karakia tātou. Tūtaua mai I runga. Tūtaua mai I raro. Tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho, kia tau wai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Okay, so before we go any further, I'd probably best introduce myself. I am Hala, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a sexual violence prevention specialist with over 10 years experience in Australia, Aotearoa, and globally. I have a PhD from the Gender and Women's Health Unit at the University of Melbourne, and my role at ACC is dedicated to building a capable, diverse, thriving, tītiriti-led violence prevention workforce. I want to also acknowledge the tangata whenua of Aotearoa and the mana whenua of Tāmaki Makaurau, where I'm dialing in from today. Really curious to see who we've got with us today, so feel free to share in the chat who you are and where you're dialing in from as well. As I mentioned before, in this series, we'll be spotlighting some really cool violence preventionists and their mahi. We define violence preventionists as anyone whose mahi, whether in a paid role or in voluntary capacity, contributes to tackling the drivers and foundations of sexual violence, family violence, and child sexual abuse. We take these foundations to be colonisation, gender inequality or patriarchy, and structural and role-based inequalities. And of course, these are all very much interconnected. Violence preventionists are a super diverse bunch. They can include people who identify as specialists, whose core role is fully or mostly about sexual violence, family violence, or child sexual abuse prevention. It can also, though, include people who work in different places, settings, communities, where it might not be their core function or core role. But all of them But even then, their mahi strengthens the protective factors that promote health and well-being and mana enhancing healthy relationships, or their mahi might be working towards reducing the risk factors for violence. This kind of work is what we call primary prevention. And I know I say this, and I've said this the last 3 webinars, but what I love about primary prevention is that there is so much scope for the imagination. And when it comes to this kind of work, there's just so many possibilities as well. As our webinar series may involve references to sexual violence, family violence and child sexual abuse, super gentle reminder to check in with yourself, how you're feeling throughout, have a think of, maybe what kind of state changes you need to get through our time together. And remember, there's no need for FOMO if you need to step out, that's all good. These webinars are recorded, as I said, and they're uploaded on our ACC YouTube within a day or 2 of the webinar. Of course, there's also support out there for anyone who might need it. We'll be sharing the Safe to Talk website in the chat. There's an awesome, super compassionate workforce around the motu who are ready to listen and who are ready to support you. But of course, there might be trusted people in your life, whether it's friends, family, or whānau, who might, you might want to check in with as well. So today, the theme of today really is delving into the role of sexual violence prevention specialists. Again, these are folks in the violence prevention workforce whose roles are mostly or entirely focused on violence prevention. We know from different analysis and research in Victoria, and also locally as well, but Victoria does have one of the, I would say, the leading primary prevention system in the world, that violence prevention specialists draw on an extraordinary repository of knowledge and skills in their mahi. There's the technical parts of their work, from understanding and applying theoretical frameworks like intersectional feminism, decolonization, gender analysis, to the various places, sectors, and industries they are working within, to designing, implementing, and evaluating prevention initiatives. Often they're doing this by drawing on qualifications and on-the-job expertise related to gender studies, criminology, psych, social work, and community and youth development. They're also often super adept facilitators and trainers, especially if they've been doing sexual violence prevention education and community. Then there's the skills like stakeholder engagement, relationship building, partnerships, collaboration. These skills can be very much underrated, but I think they're really important if you're in the business of culture change. And that requires you not only to be building relationships and trust, but also to be influencing everyday decision making. Now, that is intricate mahi. They might be working in specialist violence organisations. If we cast our mind back to the webinar with DRM, our friends at DRM are employed. Imogen Stone is employed by Help Auckland, which is of course a specialist response agency, or they might be employed by generalist organisations like a national sports association like New Zealand Rugby. So, without further ado, the reason you're all here today is to hear from the fabulous Jahla Tran-Lawrence, who's here to share her experience and insights as a sexual violence prevention specialist. Jahla has designed and implemented systems-focused primary prevention initiatives in a diverse range of settings in Aotearoa. She's worked for organisations like Thursdays in Black, TOAH-NNEST, and that's actually where Jahla and I met when we were working for Tauiwi Caucus many moons ago. Wellington Alliance Against Sexual Violence, Wellington City Council, and New Zealand Rugby. Jahla also has a background in community activism, advocacy, and social justice campaigning. So before I hand over to you, Jahla, just a reminder, we do have Q&A, a short Q&A at the end, so feel free to post your questions in the chat. And yeah, I'll hand over to you now, Jahla.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. Kia ora te whānau. I am just going to share my screen. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really, really happy that I get a chance to do this. Thank you so much, Hala, for introducing me. I'm Jahla. I'm a sexual violence prevention specialist. And I was asked to kind of talk a little bit about my career and the kind of prevention work that I do. I am currently in Cornwall in the UK, so it's actually 1 a.m. where I am, so please forgive the fact that I'm tired and a bit slow, but I'm very happy to be here. I have been delightfully fun-employed for the past 5 months while I've been travelling, and this was me a wee while ago on holiday in Vietnam, which was amazing. So I use she, her pronouns. I was mostly raised in Taranaki, spent a lot of time working in Pōneke in Wellington, Vietnamese, Trinidadian, and Pākehā. And I'm currently in the UK. All right. I have got quite a bit to get through, so I'm going to keep an eye on the time. But if I have missed anything, please just feel free to pop a question in later. And I've also got my email address at the end that and you're happy to feel free to email me. To start off, a kind of few caveats that I think are really important to kind of frame this whole conversation. So I have been asked to talk about my work a lot, and I love talking about my work. I'm super passionate, and I get so much joy from kind of sharing all the amazing things that have happened. But I very rarely talk about myself and my career for lots of reasons that I'll kind of cover. So this is a slightly more new and uncomfortable space for me, but as I will talk about a lot, what's really important to me is kind of living my values, and my values say that, representation is really important, and taking up the space as a, queer brown woman is really important, and being that representative for others who are looking at me is important. So even though it's super uncomfortable, I'm going to do it anyway. And I think that the other important thing here is that, Hala introduced me as a sexual violence prevention specialist, which I definitely identify as, but I'm not an expert. And I think there's a really important distinction between those two things. I specialize because this is the one thing that I do, sexual violence prevention, but I'm not an expert because I'm still new in my career. I've got so much to learn. I've got so long to go. So there's a really important distinction there, that I think it maybe isn't talked about quite enough. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break down my career a little bit, into the last kind of 7 years of my life, because I think this really helps people understand the different ways into this work. We know that there are, there's no kind of qualifications. You can't truly train your way into sexual violence prevention. So this might kind of show the different pathways in. And I also get a lot of young people in my life coming up to me and talking about how, they could never do this, and this is amazing, and how on earth does this happen? And then so I also want to show the kind of practical steps that I took, and also that, some of these young people are, 18 and they're just amazing. And I also think it's so important to be like, I was useless when I was 18. I started a bit later. So this is why I'm doing this. And I also want to use this opportunity to kind of really name the amazing women that have shaped each stage of my career, because I am who I am because they are who they are, and they're wonderful. And I think naming them is important. So, moving on. So, I started at university doing my undergrad, where I kind of picked up I was doing criminology, and I started learning about women, crime and social control and sexual violence through these amazing criminology papers by Lindsay Armstrong and Jan Jordan, amazing women. And that just really kind of ignited this fire in me, and it gave me language to describe something and to think about something that I had been thinking about my whole life. And it gave me language to start thinking about some of my own experiences as well. And then from there, when I decided to do my post, I basically used every postgrad opportunity to try and deepen my understanding into the world of like sexual violence, gender, masculinity. So like even when I was doing other papers, I would inevitably find a way to make it about feminism or about women, which I'm sure some of my professors got a bit frustrated at, but I loved it and I learned so much. And that is kind of the foundation of my knowledge. And that was also the year that I started working at what was the Sexual Abuse Prevention Network, what's now Respected Aotearoa, as a youth facilitator doing the Mates and Dates program, hired by the amazing Judy O'Brien, who is another key woman who's defined my entire career. And so this was like my foray into the sector. And it really enabled me an understanding of like, what is the sector and what do we do, and how do I form a link between the stuff that I'm learning academically and then this very practical application of it in a classroom. Big learning curve. I went on to do my master's, kind of again narrowing in on this kind of sexual violence, rape culture. What do young men think about these issues in New Zealand? Learned heaps there, and began tutoring as well around human trafficking, sexual violence, and other criminological issues that touched very heavily on different social justice themes. And as I was doing my master's, I also became the co-president of the Vic Feminist Organisation and the president of the Thursdays in Black, the UW organisation. So Thursdays in Black is a kind of tertiary-based sexual violence prevention campaign movement, and was I just kind of on a whim, really. I heard it was an opportunity, and I was like, you know what, I can do that. So I picked up both of those things, and that was an amazing step for me into kind of student leadership, engaging in the student community. And now I've got this kind of big passion for students and the role of students in all of this work, and students as a minority, marginalized community. And this is kind of where all that started. And then that continued into 2020, obviously a hellscape, tutoring human trafficking online during 2020, not a vibe. Um, and I started at TOAH-NNEST, hired by the amazing Miriam, who completely just changed my way of thinking. She's phenomenal. Um, and then at the end of that year, I started my PhD. And this was a whole thing. But so, people kind of often comment on how busy my life has been over the past few years. And I go, this is nothing. Like 2019, 2020, 2021, those are the years where I was literally doing a million things. My life now is easy breezy. Um, okay, so 2020, 2021, I've talked about it a million times. I will talk about it more, but we, in response to a community need and to a lot of community emotion, we established the Wellington Alliance Against Sexual Violence. We held the Let Us Live rally. It was a whole thing. We kind of advocated towards local government. We were kind of heard by the amazing Amy Bird, who was just phenomenal and really listened and made us feel valued and allowed us a seat at the table at council. So kind of consulted with WCC and with respected Aotearoa on a lot of that work. Continued my PhD. I continued at this point. I was coordinating the national campaign for Thursdays in Black and was working at TOAH-NNEST. And then I think it was and then moving into 2022, about halfway through, I was having an atrocious time with my PhD, really bad time. Decided that it wasn't for me. I had this idea that I needed a PhD to be a specialist and to succeed in my area. And I was quickly discovering that I didn't need that. And I was quite successful on my own. So decided to withdraw, best decision I've ever made, and was hired by WCC to lead that work that I've been advocating on for the past year as a consultant. And that was a really special opportunity, not just because it was a cool job and I got to do and deliver amazing work that had been kind of generated by this community movement, but also because it allowed me a full-time permanent, full-time paid position that I'd never really had before. And I think there's such a value and I found so much value in being able to be paid to do this thing that I loved and being able to do one job, as you can see in 2023, just do one thing. And that was really amazing. And then continued on. So I spent 2 years at Wellington City Council as their sexual violence prevention project lead, designing and delivering the sexual violence prevention action plan. And then did a short stint at New Zealand Rugby, helping out on a project of work with them before this year I moved to the UK. And it's been amazing. Yeah, it's been amazing. So, I kind of, when I explain my background, I tend to say that I have a trifold background. I have the academic branch, I have the kind of sector branch, and then I have the community activist branch. But really, they're all so intertwined. It kind of wasn't one avenue that I came to this work through. It was really the kind of culmination of them all, and this kind of really interesting 5 years of my life. And I think I wanted to kind of end the section talking about this, like, how did it feel question, which is not a comfortable question for me, but something that we don't talk about in terms of what it feels like to work in the space, to exist in the space. And, I think lots of people, not just like me, but people in general, feel imposter syndrome. But it's one thing to feel it, and it's another thing to be, being actively told by people that, like, I'm taking up too much space and, I'm too big for my boots and it's not appropriate for me to be, using these words and saying these things. And so you kind of, you're combating all the internal stuff and all the external stuff. So during all this time, I had to work, that kind of twice as hard for half as much. You're fighting on multiple fronts. So it was really, really strenuous. And, the definition of character building. And I had an amazing time, and I'm very grateful and very privileged to have been where I've been. But I really wanted to use this kind of whole conversation to highlight not just the amazing successes and the amazing work that we've done, but also all of the realistic challenges that we face, not just as someone working in the sector, but as like a young brown woman in the sector that is not majority, as not mostly young and brown. But some amazing things happened, you know. So some of those amazing things started right back when I was doing my honors and doing my masters. I was doing lots of things, and two of the things that we did were these little campaigns, and they were just little campaigns. But at the time, I was really trying to shift the narrative of the top one. Is like I was trying to shift the narrative of white feminism, because and the organization at uni had been a very white space for a very long time. And then I came in and I was like, well, something has to change. So trying to change that narrative, trying to bring people in, trying to demystify, and trying to really show the diversity of people that are involved in these kaupapa. And, you know, it was something small and cute, but I think it was really lovely. And it's something that I still feel really good about having done. And you'll see a young Tamitha Paul there. You know, so a few years later, we had the rally, which was an amazing, really amazing case study on the power of people, the power of community, what happens when we get these young, diverse voices all together with a really strategic plan. And also it showed not just that, you know, young people can create change, but also it really shifted the dynamic between our communities and local government, which I think kind of still is an enduring relationship that we have. And I'm happy to talk more about this time if people have questions, but I feel like I talk about it constantly, so I'm going to move on. And then after the rally, working at council, we did some amazing things. You know, everything from these kind of street art installations, these you know, bringing young people in to do data collection on where they feel safe in the city, to, you know, hiring amazing people like Tallulah and being able to bring in other people and create these opportunities to grow our workforce, and trying to do it in the most care-based way that we could. You know, at the bottom middle there, we've got the launch of the roadmap and the action plan, and in the middle of that photo, there are two young women who, when we did the rally, they were maybe 19, 20, and had all these big concerns, and we're trying to do something about it. And we were able to kind of support them through this years of journey, and they still felt so in touch with the kaupapa. So it was amazing to have them attend. And then on the bottom right, we have a group from Wales who heard about this work and were coming to New Zealand to explore our violence prevention efforts, and wanted to connect. And I just think that, you know, being able to reach that international stage was really special. So, you know, there are so many amazing things that we've achieved over the years that all look so different. It's not just, you know, we delivered a workshop or we wrote a report. It's people, it's movements, it's visible, it's diverse, and I think that's really special. Just doing a time check. Okay, so next I want to talk about this kind of role of specialization and what is a specialist, because Hala touched on this idea and earlier on when she was introducing me about specialists doing all these kind of things, and I wanted to break that down a bit. To me, specialists are these bridges between community and institutional power. You know, we are translators, we are mediators, we hold the safety and the knowledge and the kaupapa so that communities can do what they do best, and they can do it safely and effectively. And we are able to link them in and coordinate with not just other people and groups, but also the knowledge and the mechanisms and the levers to do that the best way that they know how, that is effective. And, you know, we're able to give name and give language and help people feel empowered and confident in that what they are doing is preventing sexual violence, rather than kind of more broadly just being a community development project. And giving that power to people, I think, has been really life-changing in my experiences, because it makes people feel like they're actively making a difference. But Hala talked about the kind of, as a specialist, we do this and we do this. So I wanted to kind of name some of those things. So these are all the hats. That these are just some of the many hats that I have worn in my roles as a specialist. And they're not all fun hats. I actually had a lot of fun making this graph. But, you know, we get to play the cheerleader and the activist and, to do facilitation and to do engagement, and that's fun. But we're also the bad guy. And we also have to, we're the go-to person that everyone goes, someone's treated me badly. What do I do? Or, I've experienced this. Sometimes we're HR. Sometimes, we've got to be experts in research and monitoring and evaluation. And we've got to know the history of our movement and why things the way they are. We've got to be able to be public speakers and front up and speak in the media. We've got to advocate for victim survivors who are in our spheres or who are in our organizations. We have to be able to kind of shake hands and kiss babies and know how to be the diplomat, but we also have to be the bad guy and be able to call people out on their behavior or call people out on behalf of others. So, we are so many things, especially when you're the only one of yourself in an organization. So I think this is the value of specialization, is that we are all of these things so that communities can stay doing what they want to do and what they do best. Because one of the other things that we do is we have the knowledge and the expertise to ensure that the burden of responsibility for sexual violence prevention is placed proportionally on those who have the power and influence to change, rather than just lumping the entire thing on communities that are already overburdened and burnt out. And that's our job, is to be able to know who to go to and who to say what to, and being able to kind of hold the whole picture so that we can help everyone do their bit, amongst many other things. But this is something that I feel quite strongly about, because I think that people in general spaces don't realize just how many roles that we play and how tiring that can be. And this is one of the many reasons that, I don't think that specialists should operate in isolation, because doing all of this is exhausting. So it's all exhausting. Okay, how do we do it safely and effectively? For me, that has been people. It's always been people. I've developed these kind of communities of practice, and when those communities of practice or these people, supportive people, haven't been there, where an organization has not kind of provided them, or I haven't been able to identify them, I've had to kind of create them. So we built a community of practice in Wellington, and also I have what my partner fondly refers to as Jahla's Angels. So that's the Rachel, Christy, Mel trio, who honestly saved my life a million times. When I'm constantly being like, I don't know what I'm doing, and they pat me on the back and be like, you do know. So these people in my life and in my job are the reason that I am able to do this. But also, things like staying up to date on all of the trends and the evidence and the research, so that I have faith that what I'm doing is best practice, and it is evidence-based, and it's not just this thing that I picked out on a whim. To do it safely and effectively, we've got to have the supportive infrastructure, which is so hard to do. And I'm not saying that I've always had that, because I definitely haven't, but it is necessary to do this. Otherwise, it can go quite badly. And part of that infrastructure is for me personally, having this really high trust agreements with my managers. So having people who lead me trust in my ability and trust in my knowledge, and kind of just let me go, and who are there if I need anything, but who don't micromanage me. Because when you are a kind of sole specialist in a generalist organization, they have no idea what you're doing, don't necessarily understand it, very supportive, amazing people, but maybe don't quite get it. So you just have to really have that trust. And then that last one is like, being values based is hard. It's so, so hard. And lots of us will know this, because lots of us will have had to front up and do the right thing rather than the easy thing, and have lost or compromised relationships because of it. And doing that on a daily basis as part of your job is really rough, but is the way that I'm able to go through my day and go through my career going, I did the right thing and I did it in the way that I wanted to do it and feel, safe and secure in who I am in my job. There's so many things. And I mean, these kind of things are like so personal, person to person. But for me, it's all about the people around me and their trust and their guidance. I've spent so much of my career doubting myself and what I know and being so nervous about taking up too much space that I've made so many phone calls going, am I allowed to do this? Like, do I have the right qualifications? Do I have the right knowledge? Is it, overstepping? And people just being like, you're good, you're fine, everything's fine, don't worry about it. And that is like, to them, it's such a small, minor comment, but to me, like, so validating. And then people, and I, don't know if this is the audience, but people often ask me, what I want to be a preventionist. What do I do? How do I do it? And this is kind of one part of my response. And I reflecting on after having written this, it's not as strengths based as I would like, but I think this is just kind of where I'm at this stage, which is that it's like it's super hard. It's super hard. It's supposed to be hard, but it doesn't make it any easier because you have to be okay with being disliked and unwanted and just like generally being hostile towards all the time. And to do that, you have to learn whose opinion matters. And that can be really tough because people want to be liked and you want to be able to be friends with people and you want to go into an organization and be able to, have someone to go get lunch with. And that doesn't always happen when you're the person who's coming in with all these wild, crazy ideas. So you have to really be okay with knowing whose opinion matters, that you're not always going to be liked, and it's going to be super hard. You also have to realize that, like, while you might feel like you're the cool specialist coming in to do these things, you are still learning. You're not an expert necessarily. You're definitely not an expert on everyone's experiences. So you have to keep learning. You have to listen. You've got to be humble. And there's been lots of times where I've had to balance this idea about it's not about me. And sometimes that's been a real aid, and sometimes it's been a real hindrance to my well-being. But there are times where it's so important that we look at ourselves and we look at our situation and we go, it's actually not about me. And to be able to kind of decenter yourself. Remaining committed to your values, I keep talking about that. But the last one is, we have to celebrate the small wins. And I think often, particularly when you enter into quite bureaucratic organizations, you're really, really encouraged to celebrate the small wins, almost as like a little treat to keep you going. And do that, but do not lose sight of the big goals and the radicalness and the transformation that you're trying to achieve, because otherwise you get complacent and you start going, oh, well, I did this little thing and that's great. But it's something and it's important to celebrate that, but you kind of can't lose focus of what actually matters. And then something that actually I heard on a panel that I organized many, many, many years ago, of which Judy O'Brien was actually a part of, and I don't know if she remembers this, but I had a young person there talk about how these movements, our job is really just to carry the torch one step further. It's not to take a marathon ahead. It's just to take a step for the next person to take a step ahead of us. And sometimes it's helpful to see ourselves as part of this broader movement, part of this bigger ecosystem, so that we are not carrying all the burden of change, and that actually, we're part of a community. Finally, this idea of shaping the workforce, and I know that workforce is a big conversation at the moment, and I have lots of opinions, so these are just a few of them. I think when we are talking about shaping the workforce and trying to create a vision for what we want our workforce to look like, we have to look at our hiring practices and we have to be looking at who we're bringing in and actually focusing on bringing in the person with the most potential rather than necessarily the most qualified person. Because we need people who will come in and will stay in and will commit and will be part of our community and will be in it for the long haul. Someone that we can grow and learn with, rather than someone who ticks the boxes and might be in and out in a couple of years. And I think that's a risk for a lot of organizations to take, but in my experience has paid off. We need to be succession planning. We have to be bringing in these young voices with these new ideas. And I know it can get frustrating, and I've definitely been on both sides of this, of when we have younger people come up with these, what they see, these brand new ideas that no one's ever had, and they're going to solve sexual violence if only someone did this thing. And we know that someone's been trying to do that thing for 30 years, and that can get really frustrating. But I think that we have to keep listening and we have to keep going, well, something isn't working. And even if we know why they're feeling that way, addressing that feeling of disenfranchisement and their feeling of not being heard or being represented is almost more important than the actual issue that they are trying to change. Because the more that they feel included and the more that our young people are coming in and having their voices valued, the more change that we will see in the long term. And I think that's so evident through our work at council, is that we weren't saying revolutionary things. We weren't asking for anything that hadn't been asked for before, but because of the way that we were brought in by people like Amy and Clara and people at council, we felt valued and we felt seen and we felt heard, and was able to create change. And so definitely not something that should be undervalued. We always want a diverse and inclusive workforce. And we always talk about diversity and inclusion, but diversity and inclusion doesn't just happen. It's intentional, it's curated, it's through decisions and actions and choice. And I think that, you can't kind of just like regulate your way into a diverse workforce. So when we're trying to shape the workforce, we have to make bold choices and not just kind of sit back and wait for diversity to magically happen. Social justice values, sexual violence prevention values, healthy relationship values. We preach these. We teach them. We go out and we tell communities or we tell young people this is what you should do. But it kind of means nothing if we aren't doing them. If activism doesn't start at home, if we aren't replicating those exact dynamics with our colleagues, with our teams, with our families, it feels meaningless, and it honestly feels completely disingenuous. So when it's hard, when there's no one watching us, that's when activism happens. And I think that we forget that as a sector, and we focus so much on what we're producing and not enough on who we are. We can't bring people in to work in isolation. People have to work in safe spaces, and if you can't do it safely, it's almost like don't do it, because you're creating more harm and you're putting these insane expectations on people, and it can be so damaging. And it's like, and if you're committed to doing the work, if you're committed to making a difference, don't make people do it alone. And finally, it's so rudimentary, but like job security is so important. I mean, I was reflecting when I was writing this career thing, and I haven't had a permanent contract in about 4 to 5 years. And that's not something that people can live with. We need to be having these permanent contracts. We need to be having decently paid salaries. And this is not like, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm absolutely not saying that, every little charity and NGO can just sign off on all these things. But this is what we're working towards and what we should value and what we should defend the right to have, even when it's not the easiest thing to do. We're almost done. Finally, this is kind of my parting thing to share, is that we're not an industry, we're not a sector, we are a movement. Sexual violence prevention is a movement, it is a form of activism, it is radical, it is transformative, and that's so important. That's the heart and soul of who we are and how we should move through the world and how we should interact with each other. And I think that that's so special and so often lost in this like big mechanism, and something that I really want to challenge people to think about in their practice and their work and their day to day is like, how are we being a movement? rather than just how we're being a workforce. Anyway, that's me. Thank you so much. Hopefully that was some of what you wanted to hear. Who knows? But if there's anything you want to ask me about or want to chat with me about, feel free to reach out. I'm just frolicking around the UK looking for work, so all the time in the world to chat. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jahla, for so generously sharing your experiences in the work. Speaking for myself, I felt really seen by that slide of yours with all the hats, like all the different hats that sexual violence prevention specialists wear in the work. Now, we don't have much time left, and we have a great question in the chat that I will just draw your attention to from Renee Pink. Which of the initiatives that you've been part of do you believe has had the most value or traction that you've seen in your career so far?
Great question. So the thing that I always harp on about is this rally that we did, and the result of the rally, which was that we were able to partner with council. We were able to fund 2 full-time roles, one within council, one within respected Aotearoa, to deliver on this work that we'd asked for as part of this protest. And there's lots of pieces to this, but I think what was amazing is that all the stars aligned. And the stars didn't align just through fate. Like, we worked so hard to get them to align. And we saw this amazing result of people, young people under 30, feeling like they made a difference and feeling like they specifically stood on the street, or they helped write a submission, or they had a conversation with us and something happened. We saw physical urban design changes happen in Wellington that our young people asked for and then were delivered on 2 years later. And when they walk down the street, they're able to point at something and go, that's different, and I was involved in that. And I think that just that feeling that some of our young people have of, I was part of that changed so much. And as with lots of local government, this work doesn't always stick. It doesn't always carry on past a certain few. That doesn't change the fact that the people that were involved still feel that way. We did a case study at the end of some of this work, and some of our people, young people, said that this, being part of the protest and what came after it was some of the most impactful things on their life. And I think that, to me, is one of the most valuable things I've done.
I think that's super profound, Jahla, and I think that ties into that kōrero you had earlier about the mentors in your life as well. Like, it reminds me of something, this phrase that Vicky Reynolds has around solidarity team, where it's so important having these safe spaces for growth, learning and reflection, celebration and awhi. And, just as your wahine mentors did for you, you have done for other people as well. And I think that's really awesome. Thank you for highlighting that. Unfortunately, we actually don't have any time, more time for questions. There's a lot of interest in hearing more from you, Jahla. So we might have to do a part 2 1 a.m. series if you're interested. But for now, I just want to really thank you for your time and for staying up super late to be with us today. I truly believe each and every one of us has a unique role to play in preventing violence in all the places and spaces we live in. And thank you for sharing your part that you play. So I will now close the space with our ACC karakia. Thank you all for being here with us today. Whaia, whaia, whaia te tika, whaia te pono. Mo te oranga tangata kia puta ke te whaiau, ke te ao marama, homi e, hui e, taiki e. Have a lovely day, everyone. Ka kite.
Thanks so much.